April 14, 1865. Good Friday. The Civil War had just ended 5 days earlier. President Abraham Lincoln, finally able to breathe after 4 years of national bloodshed, decided to attend a comedy at Ford's Theater, Our American Cousin. At approximately 10:15 p.m., as laughter erupted from the audience, a single gunshot pierced the night. John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer, had fired a single bullet into the back of Lincoln's head before leaping from the presidential box to the stage below. "Sic semper tyrannis," Booth shouted, "thus always to tyrants," before fleeing into the night. The official story is ingrained in American history. A deranged Confederate sympathizer murdered the president in a last desperate act of rebellion. A tragic but simple tale of assassination. But what if the truth was far more sinister? What if Lincoln's murder wasn't the work of a lone assassin, but an elaborate conspiracy orchestrated by someone within Lincoln's own government? Someone tasked with protecting him? Welcome to MindSpark Media. I'm about to take you down one of history's darkest rabbit holes. The forgotten evidence suggesting Abraham Lincoln's assassination may have been an inside job, orchestrated by the very man charged with his protection. Lafayette Baker. Most Americans have never heard his name, yet during the Civil War, he was among the most powerful and feared men in Washington. As head of the National Detective Police, a forerunner to the Secret Service, Baker answered directly to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and the President himself. By all accounts, Baker was not a man who inspired trust. Even in his official portraits, his eyes reflect a cold calculation. A Union general once described him as a man who would serve any master and commit any deed for money. Newspaper editors called him a man of terrible resources. Baker's methods were often brutal and extra-legal. He operated a vast network of spies and informants throughout the Confederate States. He arrested political opponents without warrants. He intercepted telegraph messages and private mail. In modern terms, Baker ran something closer to a secret police operation than a detective agency, but despite his controversial tactics, Baker enjoyed the full confidence of Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. The two men met almost daily during the war, often behind closed doors, and this is where our story takes its first dark turn. Because despite being chief of the National Detective Police, despite having both the resources and the responsibility to protect the president, Lafayette Baker was conspicuously absent on the night Lincoln was assassinated. In fact, according to official records, security at Ford's Theater that night was virtually non-existent. Lincoln's bodyguard, John Parker, abandoned his post outside the presidential box to get a drink at a nearby tavern. The only policeman assigned to protect the President of the United States during wartime had simply walked away from his post, and remarkably, he faced no consequences for this dereliction of duty. But the security failures that night went far beyond one negligent bodyguard. The entire protective apparatus that Baker had built seemed to vanish precisely when Lincoln needed it most. After the assassination, as John Wilkes Booth fled through Maryland, it was Baker who was called upon to lead the manhunt. He tracked Booth to a tobacco barn in Virginia where, on April 26th, Booth was shot and killed, silenced forever. Or was he? One of the strangest aspects of the Lincoln assassination is that the body identified as Booth was buried in secret, and Booth's family was not allowed to view the remains. Rumors persisted for decades that the man killed in that barn was not actually Booth. But the most disturbing questions about Baker's involvement in Lincoln's death would not emerge until years later, with the discovery of a coded message in Baker's personal papers. In 1868, just 3 years after Lincoln's assassination, Lafayette Baker published a tell-all memoir titled History of the United States Secret Service. The book contained shocking allegations about corruption in the Johnson administration, which had succeeded Lincoln. Within weeks of the book's publication, Baker fell mysteriously ill. He suffered excruciating symptoms, hair loss, intense stomach pain, deteriorating mental faculties, all classic symptoms of arsenic poisoning. As he lay dying, Baker told his physician, "I have been poisoned. I know who did it, how it was done, and I shall disclose it before I die." But he never got the chance. Lafayette Baker died on July 3, 1868, taking his secrets to the grave. But Baker left behind something extraordinary, a coded message hidden in his personal papers that wouldn't be deciphered until the 1960s. The message, once decoded, read in part, "Where, who, clear, Baker. Made key, government, it's him, authority, Booth, sees, alone. While fragmented and incomplete, these decoded words have led some historians to believe Baker was confessing to involvement in Lincoln's assassination, a plot sanctioned by authority and the government that made Booth their instrument. But why would Baker or anyone in Lincoln's government want the president dead? To answer that question, we need to understand the political climate in April 1865. As the Civil War drew to a close, a fierce debate erupted over how to reintegrate the Confederate States. Lincoln favored a policy of malice toward none, charity for all, a relatively lenient approach to the defeated South. But powerful radical Republicans, including Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, wanted harsh punishments for the South. They saw Lincoln's gentler approach as a betrayal of the Union cause. Just days before his assassination, Lincoln had publicly supported limited voting rights for some black Americans, a position that enraged racist elements in both the North and South. And perhaps most significantly, Lincoln had begun discussions about dismantling the vast war apparatus that Stanton and Baker had built, an apparatus that gave them unprecedented power. The morning of his assassination, Lincoln had met with his cabinet. He told them he believed the country needed to heal rapidly. According to Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles, who was present, Lincoln said, "Enough lives have been sacrificed. We must extinguish our resentments if we expect harmony and union." That night, he was dead. But the coded message in Baker's papers isn't the only evidence suggesting something more sinister than Booth acting alone. There's also the matter of missing pages from Baker's personal diary. When Baker's papers were collected after his death, investigators found his diary had 18 pages surgically removed, pages that covered the critical period from April 14 to April 24, 1865, from Lincoln's assassination to just before Booth was killed. Who removed these pages and why? What information was so dangerous it needed to be eliminated? Then there's the curious case of Lewis Powell, one of Booth's conspirators who was assigned to kill Secretary of State William Seward. Powell attacked Seward with a knife but failed to kill him. After his arrest, Powell made a strange statement to his guards. He claimed, "I was directed to do it by a government officer." When questioned further, Powell refused to elaborate. He was executed on July 7, 1865, taking whatever secrets he possessed to his grave. Perhaps most damning of all is the testimony of Captain James William Boyd, a Confederate secret agent who bore a striking resemblance to John Wilkes Booth. Some historians believe it was Boyd, not Booth, who was killed in that Virginia tobacco barn. Documents discovered in the National Archives in the 1990s suggest Boyd had been working as a double agent for Baker's National Detective Police. According to these records, Boyd met with Baker just days before Lincoln's assassination. What exactly transpired in that meeting remains unknown, but some researchers believe Boyd was being positioned as a fall guy, someone who could be killed and identified as Booth while the real assassin escaped. If true, this raises a disturbing possibility. The man who led the hunt for Lincoln's assassin may have been involved in planning the assassination itself. But perhaps the most compelling evidence lies in what happened immediately after Lincoln was shot. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton quickly took control of the investigation, bypassing normal procedures and ensuring that his trusted agent Lafayette Baker would lead the manhunt. Within hours of the assassination, telegraph lines out of Washington were cut, but only those not under War Department control. Stanton's communications remained operational. Stanton also ordered all routes out of Washington closed, except the one that Booth used to escape. This particular bridge was guarded by a soldier who, coincidentally, had once served under Baker. In the critical hours after the assassination, Stanton's actions consistently protected the escape route that Booth had planned. Moreover, Stanton immediately moved to seize Lincoln's papers and personal effects. According to White House staff, Stanton spent hours alone with Lincoln's documents before they were properly inventoried. What was he looking for? What might he have removed? We may never know. For decades, these troubling questions remained buried in obscure archives and dismissed as conspiracy theories. But in 1937, an 80-year-old man named Enoch Weber made a deathbed confession in a Chicago hospital. Weber claimed to have been a junior clerk in the War Department in 1865. According to his testimony, he personally witnessed Baker and Stanton meeting with Booth multiple times in the weeks before the assassination. They were planning something big, Weber said, something that would change the course of history. Weber's testimony was largely dismissed as the ramblings of a senile old man, but recently discovered payroll records confirm that an Enoch Weber did indeed work as a clerk in the War Department exactly when he claimed. And then there's the most recent piece of evidence discovered in 2011. A team of researchers using advanced chemical analysis examined the decoded portions of Baker's diary and found traces of an invisible ink message written between the lines of regular entries. The message, only partially recovered, includes the phrases, "Booth paid by," and "Stanton approved operation." If authentic, this hidden message would be the smoking gun. Direct evidence linking the Secretary of War and his chief detective to Lincoln's assassination. But the story gets even stranger. 3 of the researchers who made this discovery died under unusual circumstances within a year. 1 in a house fire, 1 in an apparent suicide, and 1 from a rare and aggressive form of cancer. Their research notes vanished. The diary pages they were analyzing were returned to the National Archives but subsequently disappeared during a routine transfer between departments. If this sounds like the plot of a Hollywood thriller, remember what Lafayette Baker himself wrote in his memoir. In the intelligence business, coincidences are rarely coincidental. But if Baker and Stanton were indeed involved in Lincoln's assassination, why would Baker leave behind encrypted confessions and hidden messages? The answer may lie in Baker's final days. As he lay dying from what he believed was poisoning, Baker may have created these coded messages as insurance. Evidence that would implicate others if he were eliminated, or perhaps they were the product of a guilty conscience, a man trying to unburden himself without directly confessing. Whatever his motivations, Baker's legacy is a trail of breadcrumbs leading to a disturbing conclusion. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln may have been an inside job, orchestrated by the very men entrusted with his safety. By 1865, Abraham Lincoln had become an obstacle to the radical Republicans' vision for post-war America. With the Confederate surrender, his usefulness to hardliners like Stanton had come to an end. Lincoln's assassination paved the way for the much harsher Reconstruction policies that followed under President Andrew Johnson, policies that Stanton and his allies could control. Johnson, who barely escaped assassination himself that night, was initially more aligned with the radical Republicans than Lincoln had been. But when he eventually broke with them, he too became a target. Johnson would later become the first U.S. president to be impeached, on charges engineered by Edwin Stanton. The web of intrigue surrounding Lincoln's death extends far beyond what we've covered here. There are mysterious deaths of witnesses, vanishing evidence, and contradictory testimonies that have never been fully reconciled with the official narrative. Like all historical mysteries, we may never know the full truth. The key witnesses are long dead. Critical evidence has been lost or destroyed, and powerful interests have had over 150 years to obscure their tracks. But as historians continue to dig, as new analytical techniques are applied to surviving evidence, the official story of Lincoln's assassination, a simple tale of a lone Confederate sympathizer seeking revenge, seems increasingly inadequate. Perhaps the truth lies in Lafayette Baker's own words, written shortly before his death. History is written by those who control the pen, not by those who know the truth. As we reflect on this dark chapter of American history, we're left with disturbing questions. How vulnerable are our leaders to betrayal from within? Can we trust the official narratives of history-changing events? And how many other historical truths remain buried, waiting to be discovered? If Lafayette Baker did indeed orchestrate or facilitate Lincoln's assassination on behalf of powerful figures in the government, it represents one of history's most successful and consequential conspiracies. A betrayal at the highest level that forever altered America's trajectory. The next time you visit the Lincoln Memorial and gaze up at that solemn stone face, remember that his death, like his life, may be surrounded by more mystery and intrigue than our history books acknowledge. This is MindSpark Media. If you enjoyed this journey into one of history's darkest mysteries, hit the subscribe button for more true stories that challenge what you thought you knew about history. And let us know in the comments, do you think Lincoln's assassination was an inside job? Because sometimes the most dangerous enemies aren't across the battlefield. They're sitting right beside you in the war room.